We've all watched comic book heroes blur past at highway speeds on the big screen. But have you ever actually stopped to wonder what it would take to literally build a human capable of running 80 miles per hour? Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking the Hermes consensus. This isn't just some sci-fi thought experiment either. It's a staggering, scientifically grounded genomic blueprint from the Biocomputational and Advanced Genomics facility that maps out the exact physics and biology you'd need to engineer extreme biological velocity. Section 1. The superspeed illusion and why comic books lied to us. To really get why superspeed is so phenomenally complex, we have to look at the absolute visceral failure of what researchers called simulation 404. What actually happens when a standard human hits 80 miles per hour? Well, total critical homeostatic failure. The simulation proved that the sheer kinetic forces alone would shatter your bones on the very first stride. But let's say your skeleton miraculously survived. The metabolic heat generated by that kind of massive muscle exertion pushed the model to a brain-melting core temperature of 108.7 degrees Fahrenheit, and that happened in just 12 seconds. Which brings us to our core thesis, summed up perfectly by lead researcher Dr. R.S. Thorne. He points out that the human body isn't just a vehicle, it's an active furnace. Speed isn't a single superpower you can just toggle on. It's a highly volatile, completely interconnected genetic overhaul of the entire human machine. Think about it. You can't just slap Formula One tires on a rusty family sedan and expect to win a race, right? You literally have to redesign the entire thing from the ground up. Section 2. Structuring the chassis, the musculoskeletal frame. Okay, so because the kinetic forces of striking the ground at 80 miles per hour scale exponentially, meaning a normal human femur would splinter like a dry twig instantly, scientists had to map out a completely new musculoskeletal architecture. You need a frame that can handle massive stress without adding heavy, slow bulk. First, they target the LRP5 and collagen genes. This turns bones into shatter-resistant, microelastic carbon composites that actually yield slightly under G-forces instead of just snapping. Next up, they use a specific COL5A1 variant to give the connecting tendons a massive 400% increase in ultimate tensile strength. And finally, instead of completely knocking out the myostatin gene, which would trigger fatal heart failure, they use a precise epigenetic knockdown. This safely and dramatically bulks up those explosive, fast-twitch muscles in the limbs while keeping the heart perfectly normal. Section 3. Powering the metabolic engine, the energy paradox. With the frame built, we hit a massive engine bottleneck. Explosive speed instantly depletes cellular energy, right? And it drowns the body in fatigue-inducing lactic acid. A fast-running human is basically an energy sinkhole. But researchers figured out how to turn this massive weakness into a hyper-efficient recycled fuel loop. It's actually genius. Step 1. They stabilize those newly built fast-twitch fibers using the ACTN3 gene so they don't tear under stress. They still produce massive amounts of lactate, though. So, step 2, they engineer MCT4 transporters to immediately export this lactate out of the burning muscles. And step 3, MCT1 transporters rapidly pull that lactate right into the heart and the brain to be burned as clean fuel. The fast-twitch muscles generate the speed, and the rest of the body literally recycles their waste to keep the whole engine running. Section 4. Upgrading the sensory uplink, the neural control loop. Now, a high-powered machine is completely useless if you can't steer it. At 80 miles per hour, you're traveling nearly 117 feet every single second. At that velocity, standard human reaction times would cause a fatal collision before you could even blink. To solve this massive lag, the engineers had to radically alter the baseline. Standard nerve impulses travel at 120 meters per second. By upregulating the NRG1 gene to thicken the myelin sheath on the nerves, conduction speed jumps to over 200 meters per second. They slashed synaptic latency down to a mere 42 milliseconds. And honestly, this is the coolest part. By tweaking the ARR3 and RGS4 genes in the eyes, they boost our visual frame rate from a blurry 60 Hz up to a staggering 220 Hz. It effectively slows down time for the runner. It's like upgrading your brain to a high-speed slow-motion camera. Section 5. The biological heat sink, the thermoregulatory crisis. So the structural, metabolic, and neural pathways are all beautifully integrated. But now we face the thermodynamic boss fight. 75% of the runner's metabolic energy converts directly to heat, and normal human sweating is way too slow to handle that. To prevent the brain proteins from literally denaturing and boiling inside the skull, the genome engineers a molecular safety net. A synthetic trigger activates heat shock proteins the second the body gets too hot. These act like tiny braces, stabilizing cellular structures under thermal stress, which effectively raises the body's fatal thermal threshold to a scorching 45 degrees Celsius. It buys the cells some seriously precious survival time. But you still have to actually get that heat out of the body. So they radically redesign the system into a liquid cooling loop. They introduce an EDR gene variant that massively scales up evaporative cooling, bumping total active sweat gland density by 50%. Then, a NOS3 modification allows hyper-targeted blood vessel dilation. They heavily utilize arteriovenous anastomoses, which are those specialized direct heat shunts located in the palms of your hands and your face, to dump heat out of the body like an absolute radiator. And finally, they redesign hemoglobin to make absolutely sure it keeps delivering oxygen to the brain, even at these incredibly extreme internal temperatures. Section 6. The inevitable biological tax, the cost of performance. When the researchers finally loaded this fully realized Hermes consensus genome into Simulation 405, it actually worked. The digital model sprinted and successfully achieved homeostasis at 80 miles per hour for a sustained 60 seconds. But while this simulation proves it is biologically possible, it brings us to a really humbling realization: the biological tax. What is the actual cost of living as a biological marvel? Well, a living human with a Hermes genome would require upwards of 20,000 calories every single day just to survive. That's the equivalent of eating about 40 cheeseburgers a day just to maintain your basic everyday baseline. You are no longer just a human, you're an incredibly fragile, incredibly high-maintenance machine. And remember, these genetic modifications are permanent, which means massive real-world trade-offs. You wouldn't be a god. You'd be highly vulnerable. That high bone density? You'd sink like a stone in water. That hypervascularized heat-dumping system we just talked about? It means if you were ever in a cold environment, you'd freeze to death in a winter storm in hours. Your accelerated nervous system makes you highly prone to severe hypersensory overstimulation. And the constant active cellular regeneration pathways required for those muscles and bones, it presents the constant ticking time bomb of uncontrolled cellular division: cancer. Project Hermes shows us that while we can theoretically engineer the ultimate biological racing car, a racing car requires a pit crew, high-octane fuel, and constant maintenance, or it literally tears itself apart. It leaves us with a profound realization. Nature didn't make us slow because she lacked imagination. Our natural human physiology is actually an absolute masterpiece of survival, homeostasis, and elegant balance. So it really makes you wonder, is our greatest superpower actually our natural evolutionary limit?
Please like and subscribe.